Welcome, everybody. I'm Grace Bubeck, and this is the first of a series of book conversations. And today's book is a book by Gail Brenner called Suffering is Optional. And welcome, Gail, and welcome to all of you. Gail, as I promised, I'm going to read out your bio today so that I won't leave anything out because I think it's a nice bio. So Gail Brenner, PhD, is a clinical psychologist who joyfully helps people discover that suffering is optional. And she's also a lover of truth with a fire that burns brightly. I can attest to that. She's the author of The End of Self-Help, Discovering Peace and Happiness Right at the Heart of Your Messy, Scary, Brilliant Life. Gail has worked with clients and groups for over 20 years, bringing laser-like clarity to the confusion of common human problems, such as reactive emotions, feelings of personal inadequacy, and relationship struggles. She offers the loving presence that invites people into harmony with all of life. To learn more, visit gailbrenner.com, where you'll find hundreds of articles, guided audio meditations, and videos. And I should add, actually, Gail, that you don't add that, but you have a very live and active blog.
Yes.
So, that's one of the ways that Gail communicates with people.
Yeah.
In a very wonderful way. So, Gail, welcome again.
Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. I love this format and your style. So I'm thrilled to be here with everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. You know, and I love yours. There's such an enthusiasm and freshness that communicates itself through you and through your writing. And I always enjoy that. It's just, you know, we all have like flavors of what we transmit and what we communicate to people, and that's some of yours. And I just, you know, that there's always a kind of smile that comes on my face when I read your things, because there's such an enthusiasm and such a love of truth and a love of the opening that comes with truth. You know, the opening, the freshness, just the sheer vitality of it. So that communicates itself very, very strongly in what you write, Gail.
It's my heart, so it's how it comes out.
Yes. Yeah. So Gail, I wanted to start with a question about your book. Your book is so interesting because it's just such a fascinating cross between a self-help book and non-dual teachings, which are usually not written in that style. And you know, for somebody who wrote about the end of self-help in her last book, you know, it's interesting that you used that very genre in a way, you know, to write your own book. And I find it immensely practical. And in that sense, it actually takes the best of, you know, of that genre to talk about something that transcends the assumption of that, the assumptions of that genre, because the assumptions are usually personality based, you know.
Yes.
It's all about me getting help and me finding help and me helping myself.
Yes, fixing ourselves.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And this is not about that. This is about discovering what's already whole, what's already, you know, at peace, what isn't suffering. So just maybe tell us a little bit more about what motivated you to write a book like that, you know, and how you came to how you came to present things that way. You know, what inspired you to do it that way, and how did you feel that would enable you to communicate to people what you felt was essential?
Well, when it came time and the opportunity arose to write another book, I didn't hesitate in knowing what the topic would be. And by the topic, I mean, and let me just say the full title so we all have that out here, which is Suffering is Optional, a Spiritual Guide to Freedom from Inadequacy and, am I saying this right? And feelings of inadequacy and self-judgment.
Yes.
I think I didn't get that right.
A spiritual guide to freedom from self-judgment and feelings of inadequacy.
Okay, there we go.
Here we go.
So in the work I do and the people I interact with, this identity, I want to say false identity or distorted self-description of personal inadequacy is so pervasive and so deeply felt in people and believed. And and when that's like the core of the illusion of the separate self, it seeps out into so many life areas, you know, and affects our everyday happiness, the decisions that we make, the ways we hold ourselves back and then feel bad for that, and shame. And I mean, there's so much around that I think is a source of suffering for a lot of people. So I wanted to write about this topic because it's essential to unpack it in a way that brings in the non-dual teachings, because I want to say, in my opinion, in my experience, what I absolutely know to be true, this is the only way through this identity, is to understand it, to know what's false and what's true, to not think that we need to fix ourselves and become adequate. This phrase that's common out there in self-help is, I need to learn how to love myself. Mm-hmm. It's a nice phrase, and if it resonates with people, that's great. Like I'm not against anything, but I think people struggle a lot with, I need to love myself and I don't know how to do that. And I want to get to the core of that question, which is, who is this self that we're trying to love? Where is this love if we're not already loving ourselves? So I really want to get to that, like really untangle all of that so that we can see what it is that's actually the problem, because only then can we get to a point of the understanding that's going to bring the freedom for all of that. So that's the topic that I wanted to write about. And I know it's so pervasive. Like, you know, your audience, I would assume, is mostly spiritual seekers and people who are interested in non-duality and maybe other spiritual paths as well. And, you know, it's beautiful that this path and that that people are already in that and know about it and are studying it and experimenting and, you know, have a great fire for that path. But there are lots of people out there who have this identity of inadequacy, but don't know about this path. I mean, for 40 years, I didn't even know that this was possible, what we were here to talk about. And if I was like that, I'm sure there are many, many people like that. So I wanted to write something that kind of bridged like into the self-help territory, kind of go and get those people and then bring them back. So that was my motivation for the topic, and also writing the book in the way that that I did, that I hope appeals to lots of people who are struggling with this problem.
Yeah, you know, I know that so well. I mean, you know, I've worked with clients who struggle with this. Oh, I need to love myself, and you know, inevitably, if it's something that you're trying to do, you're bound to fail. You know, there's bound to be moments when you feel loving, and there's bound to be moments when you don't.
Yeah.
And it can be helpful to some extent. You know, I mean, the whole Louise Hay movement, and, you know, the kind of looking into the mirror and saying, I love myself. It works for some people, you know, and it allows them to open to love to a certain extent. I think that's fair to say,
Sure.
you know, but as long as love is something that we achieve, that we do, you know, that we practice, we haven't gotten to the truth, which is that we are love.
Yes.
And so it fails, you know, the failure of that kind of loving is as predictable as the success, you know, because that's in the realm of duality, right?
It has to be temporary.
Yeah.
So if you somehow can arrive at that good feeling about yourself, or some moments, or even some period of time in your life when there aren't so many worries and things are going well and you're feeling good about the choices that you're making and all of that, that's wonderful. But it just, if it's in the world and it's made of objects, it's temporary by nature.
Yeah.
And what we're looking for is, how do we discover what's here always, so that even when we might get caught up, excuse me, in that personal identity, to know that in any moment, it can be untangled and discovered that this freedom is here. And the reason that that can happen is because this freedom is always here. So it's not about going somewhere and getting something and hanging on when things happen to be going well, which is wonderful. It's about knowing that whatever is happening, no matter what situations are coming and going, no matter what feelings come and go, or thought patterns, that's the human life, and that's beautiful in its own way. But this piece is always here and available.
Mm-hmm. So Gail, you know, I was just reminded of what the time when I opened to non-dual teachings. And it was, I remember that I was sitting on the couch, I was meditating. And meditating at that time was still a practice. You know, it was a doing. I was meditating to get something, to be peaceful, for the mind to be more quiet. And I sat on the sofa, and I realized my mind was still as busy as it had always been. Maybe it had calmed down a little bit, but I wasn't getting anywhere very much with what I was doing. And there was like a sense that I needed to find another way of, or I needed to find some way of finding peace that wasn't like that, because I'd done that. It had, you know, it had helped a lot in my life. You know, it had calmed things down a lot, but I knew I wasn't what I was looking for. Mm-hmm. And it's the same thing, you know, it's like when I don't know what your sense is, but my sense is that the doing of peace, or the doing of love, you know, the practicing somehow needs to get people to a point where they realize they've gotten so far and they can't get any further.
Yeah.
And you know, it's almost like getting to the very limits of what you can do with the self-help, mm-hmm. or with the meditation. That's a practice, you know. And then, you know, there's got to be something else. And that's what, you know, that's what opens people to that.
That's a gateway in. Yes, when we try hard to get what we think we want, and somehow that fails, which it probably will fail at some point.
Mm-hmm.
But that tendency to want to know and find something, it can be used to as an ally, sort of that need to know, that as a useful tool along the way, because what I find is it's very helpful for people to understand the nature of thinking and understand the nature of feeling and emotion and what that's like. So instead of looking for love out there, the mind can be used in a very useful way to further us along the path. And when I say along the path, it's along the path here to go into our inner worlds. So that we can really know in any moment what is happening in our experience. And by that, I mean, like, where's our attention going? So these ways of studying and experiments that can come from these studies that we do of our own experience are so essential. And that's a way to use the mind and use the need to know in a way that I think furthers us along.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. Mm-hmm.
I want to add something to that, if I may, that, people speak of the direct path, and, what I speak about isn't at all incompatible with the direct path. So the direct path is you return your attention to being aware. You rest in awareness, you abide. And then if the attention goes away, you re-establish yourself, you come back over and over and over. And that's teachers who teach the direct path, that's what that is. And that's, beautiful. But, and I advocate that and practice that myself and kind of live with that. However, people get stuck in their conditioning. And what I find in working with people is that often that just returning to awareness doesn't work, so to speak. The pattern keeps coming back. It keeps causing suffering. They keep getting stuck in it. So what I find is a different means is needed then. That the direct path isn't quite, I would say there's not a readiness for that yet. Eventually, everything boils down to the direct path, to this return to awareness. But the question is, how do we ready ourselves for that? How do we untangle the conditioning enough so that that realization of what's always here becomes natural? And that's where the study of our inner experience can be really useful. So we really become an expert in how our conditioned patterns work. So we know when we're caught in them, and we know what to do with them when that happens.
Yeah. I find it also useful, in the sense that when they're searching, the searching usually takes us outside, takes us to a teacher, takes us to retreats where we have beautiful experiences. And then, we search for that experience again. But the movement is one of outward looking, and what you do in encouraging people to get to know themselves so intimately is the searching goes inward, the attention, no, not the searching, the attention goes inward. And that's actually the right kind of direction for the movement of attention. Yes. And, if it stays outwardly bound, even with direct path teachers, people have to keep going to retreats or have to keep watching YouTube videos, or, to get that sense of spaciousness or peace or love or whatever it is, they're experiencing and they're looking for again. It's like it keeps having to be found through outward stimulation, and that's not helpful. it has to be found just in the simplicity of one's own experience in the moment. And that's what you keep directing people into. And that I find that very useful, very helpful.
You know, in my own path,
very truthful.
Truthful. Mm-hmm. In my own path, there were a number of big turning points, and one of them was when I was going to a lot of retreats and just, loved this teaching and wanted to absorb everything. And then the insight was, oh, I'm not just supposed to go to retreat after retreat. I'm supposed to listen to what they're saying and actually apply it to my own experience. Yeah. So my attention had been outward for, a few years, actually, until that insight landed that, I would be able to kind of do the guided meditations in the retreats and all of that. But in terms of like this being, alive in my own experience and not just relying on going to the next retreat or the next teacher, I had to start doing this investigation and all these experiments eternally. And it was a huge insight for me and really shifted things dramatically, because then I was totally on fire. I wanted to know everything about my inner experience. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I it's true. I mean, I remember a similar moment when I was, just meditating and resting in myself, in the light and the peace that was there. And there was a very simple thought, a very simple recognition that, oh, this is what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. And it's like, it's like this finding of truth in oneself. Nothing can replace that. Mm-hmm. And when it's found just in that simple being with oneself, that's when it starts being real. Mm-hmm. That's when it starts kind of almost like sinking in fully. Because before then, as long as there's an external facilitation, whether it's a tape or whether it's a video or whether it's a retreat or guided meditation or whatever it is, it's not the same. There's still a relying on that mm-hmm. External facilitation, and ultimately it has to be found in ourselves, by ourselves, doesn't it?
It does. And I think that that's with the limit of the doing, because I think we can't make that happen for ourselves. What you're describing and what I described is just a moment of really relaxation of the doer to let in that insight, because insights aren't done and gotten. They arrive, they appear, and they come from some crack in the defensiveness or doership or personal self or whatever, however you want to say it. So just you and me having this conversation right here, maybe that will go into someone's crack and, have them just have that arrive for them. But there's this kind of paradox in this path, isn't there? And I'm sure anybody who is interested in these teachings finds this, that we want it, and the way to get it is to relax and do nothing and give up all the effort around it. So yes, go to the retreats and listen to the teachers, and when it's time, the insight will come, and then there's a shift. Yeah. And then we're then all we can do is say thank you. you know, just thank you for that. Yeah, that's what brings the gratitude, when we realize that we don't make any of this happen. These insights, this love of truth, this fire, we don't make any of that happen. When we really get that, we just, there's this total surrender and like, thank you for this. Thank you for this gift.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, it's almost like it's part of that realization that we realize we didn't do any of it, you know.
Yeah.
It was always there, and we just weren't able to see it.
Yeah.
And you know, I do want to add something, because I'm very aware that, you know, I'm always talking to two kinds of people: the people who have had an awakening, and the people still looking for it. So my experience of working with people who have had awakenings is that even afterwards, there can still be a looking. You know, it's like almost like even then there's still, like, you know, an experience of having lost it often. And people have to realize that it's still there, even though it may feel like they've lost it. They've lost that grace, that love, that light, that, you know, that exuberance. It's like they still have to learn to find it, no matter what happens to be the experience, you know.
Mm-hmm.
They know truth, but it's like the conditioning comes back, and it has to be met in a very new way. And that's often not immediately obvious, you know, and people get thrown a lot.
Yeah.
And so that same, you know, to me, it's very humble, you know, it's a very humble kind of willingness to look again, look again, look again. What's happening? What's here right now? And that is really only ever possible by turning towards self.
Yes.
And you know, we are here to facilitate that turning in, and to, you know, to help with that. But ultimately, it has to be done by oneself.
That kind of moment that you're describing, when someone has had some opening and then something closes again, there's some sense of the separate self kind of coming together, kind of taking over. And if the separate self is in charge, then there'll be the disappointment. I got to keep looking for it. And that's the out there looking, you know, oh, I lost it. But there's quite a bit of maturity needed actually in that moment to go, wait, let me just look at what happened here and not freak out about the losing of it, and not get lost in that, but in coming back and opening to look at what happened with attention. Because what happened there is something very simple. It feels big, but it's actually quite simple. That attention got glued onto thoughts. That's basically what happens. There might be some emotions there, but attention, which has somehow, if there's an opening, releases from thought, or thought stops, and then attention expands. It doesn't actually expand, but it feels quite expansive. And it's, you know, maybe there's even deep experiences of nothingness and everythingness, and, you know, there's all kinds of things that can happen. But if that's quote unquote forgotten, then the only thing that means is that thoughts have appeared and the attention has glued on to the content of those thoughts. And I want to stress the content of the thoughts, because then we're in the story. Mm-hmm. Thoughts can run by our minds, and they do all the time. I have tons of thoughts. It's a matter of how they are or are not paid attention to. Mm-hmm. And not necessarily just the thought, but the content. When you get involved in the meaning and the interpretation, and I had it and now I don't have it, and she has it and I don't have it, and that's all, or I should have it, that's all mental, that's all thought. Mm-hmm. And once we really understand how much of the veering away from our true nature is about gluing on to the content of thought, once we really get that, then it's like, I'm not interested in thought anymore. Mm. And that actually was another turning point for me, like, no thoughts are really helping me here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that's I know I had to reach that point, of just realizing that doubting was just doubting, was just thought, and that it had, there was no truth in it, basically. And if I didn't pay attention to it, then it was nowhere.
Yeah.
It had no reality in and of itself. Yeah. So we got a bit away from your book.
Yeah.
Let's see. Is there anything that you absolutely feel you want to communicate about your book? That that you feel is like the center, one of the central messages, or the central kind of just tools that you want people to know about?
Well, it's organized into 5 practices, and I call them practices because that's just kind of the easiest word. But they are, I'll just say what they are and maybe a little bit about each of them. The first one is turning toward our experience. This turning toward movement is, and of course it's not a movement, it's just a shift of attention from the objects out there to our inner world. So that's essential. If we're out there trying to fix ourselves and become a better version of ourselves, that's, as we were saying earlier, is somehow going to fail at some point and be frustrating. It's frustrating for people because they want to feel better. Yeah. And this movement of turning toward, it's so profound because it can be scary, it can be off-putting. We have all kinds of patterns of avoidance. It's behind addictions and compulsive behaviors and busyness and everything. So there's a great deal of conditioning that helps us to avoid our inner experience. So the radical movement is to turn toward and go in. Mm-hmm. And then the second practice is about finding that gap between our experience and being aware, so that there is an observing presence that can observe, just for simplification, thoughts and feelings, and other things too, but let's just say thoughts and feelings. So recognizing that when you can observe a thought, or even when you can say, oh, I feel scared right now, just to be able to say that, there has to be an observing presence. So the second practice is about noticing that there is this observing presence that's neutral and accepting in and of itself, which enables us to look at our experience. The third practice is losing interest in thoughts. So that's a whole chapter, and it goes through the whole untangling of what is a thought, because it's a science in and of itself. It's a lot to just really understand. Anytime we compare, you expect something, you have a story running through your mind, you're in the past, you're worried about the future, doubting. I mean, the thought has an array of different ways that it shows up. So understanding thought so that we can identify it, and then I talk a lot about losing interest in the content of our thinking. Then the fourth practice is about opening to our emotions and welcoming them. And that's all about understanding what an emotion is. And there's a relationship here. And I wanted to follow up on that when you were talking about this pattern of doubting that you've had and noticed in yourself. That's probably fueled by fear, because that's one of those, like, should I or shouldn't I, or what if I make the wrong decision and I do this or I do that? So to understand, if there's a sticky pattern of thought, there's probably an unexplored emotion underneath that. So there's an invitation here then to understand what emotions are, to have lots of tools to know what to do with them, because when they are unexplored, then they're going to be the fuel behind compulsive patterns and compulsive thinking. So that's the fourth practice. And then the last one is called the sacred return, which is actually not a practice per se, because a practice means we're doing something. And in the sacred return is really the culmination of all of that, when we can turn toward our experience and see it without getting involved in it and lose interest in thoughts, and we understand what a feeling is. And then we can start to understand this formlessness of consciousness and the timelessness of it and the emptiness, and we're perched then, ready to open to all of that. And so that's that return, which feels like there's a movement of someone doing something, but it's really a cracking open and realizing the truth of what's always here, and the invitation to rest in that.
Mm.
So that's how the book is organized, and those practices relate to each other. And there are tons of like reflections and exercises, and because I really want these teachings to come alive for people. And not that I can make that happen, but I can certainly put out as much as I can to engage people. So going back to what we were talking about in the beginning of making these teachings alive in our own experience. So there are a lot of ways to work with that in the book.
Yes, and my sense is also that that's the strength of the self-help genre.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually inviting people really to look for themselves, or to inquire into stuff, and and it can be extremely helpful. And you're actually essentially asking them to do self-inquiry.
Yes, that's
In
true.
one form or another.
Yeah.
So it's like it's like using the practicality of that self-help kind of genre to really to encourage people to inquire, and that's why I think it works so well also for people who have had awakenings, but who don't necessarily, when it happens like out of the blue, people don't know that kind of turn inwards. They're not used to it, and they still have to learn that, and that can take time. That can take, I mean, it's easier for them because awareness is there, to help them do this. But it's still something that's turning toward, it really comes to me, it's like that's so essential. And we're all conditioned not to do this. I mean, in fact, you know, I think we're basically programmed to turn outward, away from ourselves. And so
That's actually programmed in the brain.
yes.
Because at the level of the human brain, and you know, all animal brains, we're always looking to protect ourselves, and to do that we have to look outward. So we're built for fear and tension and anxiety. Not anxiety per se, because that's when the human mind gets involved, but at the most primitive physiological level, we're primed for separation and fear and vigilance and out there. We're not primed to relax and look inside.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So, you know, it's also wanting in what you say for people who haven't read the book. I just wanted to check with you whether you think that's a fair way of describing the difference between the second and the fifth practice. You know, the second being, I mean, really, what you mean there is it's possible to witness what's happening in
Yes.
yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to kind of be in the observer. And being in the observer, you know, some people stay there for a long time and they think doing just that is enough, and it isn't. Because the sacred return, as you call it, is actually you know, the being in the observer still has a duality. There's the observer and what's observed.
Exactly.
And in the essential awareness, beingness, there's no more, you know, there's no more observing really per se. There's a noticing, which is very different. You know, it's like there's no doing, there's no shifting attention. And as I understand it in the second practice, what you're teaching people is to shift the attention to what's happening inside.
To what's happening inside, and also to know that there's the being aware, the observing presence, and the object, you know, the thought or feeling that's being observed, to recognize. So there is a kind of move into that duality as in the service of understanding the non-duality and realizing that. Yeah. But it's non-attachment to the object then. So there's a difference between feeling sad and saying I'm sad and having that sadness overtake you, as opposed to, oh, there's sadness here. This is how it feels in my body. Oh, I see this story running that's very familiar to me. That's a whole different experience than being totally immersed in the sadness. So that's what that second practice is about, being able to observe and see that, see these objects rather than being completely involved in them.
Yeah, yeah.
In fact, that's one of the, I actually don't even remember if this is in the book, but it's something I've been working with recently, is to use language to support the disidentification. So instead of using personal pronouns like I am sad or I feel this way or this happened to me, to use the language in a less personal way. So sadness is here right now. This experience happened in the past. This, you know, and it's a little awkward to kind of get going with it, but the meaning of it is again profound. That we're not taking these things personally, and it's a little tool, but it's one that I find, and I think people find useful, because we take these things as like, this defines me, you know, this thing that happened to me in the past, or this pattern that just keeps coming in relationships and I always end up with the wrong person, or whatever it is. We think that that's us, and we're somehow causing that, and we're to blame, and we feel shame, and there's so much around that. So to begin that untangling from the personal feeling around it, it can help to just play with using that neutral language rather than personal language.
Oh, that's interesting. It does. I imagine it feels awkward for people to start with.
It feels awkward, and there's often a big wow. Like, oh, wow, this feels totally different than saying, this is me. Yeah. And it's just, I'm in favor of whatever helps. So it's just I throw out lots of things that people can try. And I really like the word experiment, like try it out, do something different, just whatever it might be, just kind of play with this inquiry. And that's one way to play with it.
Yeah. Lovely. I wonder whether that would be a good moment to open up to questions.
Sure.
What do you think, Gail?
Yeah. Sounds good.
So let's see. Does any of you have an immediate question? Let me just see. Okay. Switch to gallery view here. So just to remind you, you can either wave at me if your video is on, or you can click on the participants button, and in the little window that comes up at the bottom, there's a button that says raise hand, and you can raise your hand and then I will unmute you.
I also want to add, Grace, if I may, that it could be a question or just a way that someone is stuck. And, if we want to just kind of work with that, that's a possibility as well.
Okay. Yes. Great. So this is your chance, Deanna. Hold on. I'm just going to unmute you. Okay. Go ahead.
So I'm always, I like everything you're saying. I'm always looking for tools kind of post-awakening just for integration. And I have a situation where somebody that's in my inner circle, who I actually see at satsangs and who I see regularly, there's an experience that I'm having in their presence where as soon as I see their face, I don't want to use the word repulse, but there's something in me that goes, yeah, just like I'm seeing something, like there's some unbalance there and like they're kind of crazy, but yet the experience is that I'm still seeing it. The teacher that's doing the satsang has no problem with this person. So I know that it's still a reflection of something in me. Or in my conditioning, I would say. So just learning, I'm wanting to, normally if something bothers me, with emotion, I will actually feel and sit with that emotion. This, I feel immediately a disassociation, like I just go away, because whatever that's bringing up for me is like too big and I don't want to go there. So I have not been able to, in that situation, actually feel the feeling that's coming up for me, because it immediately just kind of disappears along with my presence.
Okay, so when you dissociate, then you're saying the feeling disappears, like there's nothing even there to explore. Is that how it happens for you?
No, it feels like I might need another step to come back, because the disassociation is so big. Like if I'm feeling anger, I can actually go into the sensation without the story. But this, I'm not having success doing that with this.
Yeah.
Because it's just probably hitting me at a place where there's my own, programming of deep fear or something, because it's just feels too big.
Yeah. So I have a direct answer to your question, but before I get to that, this is a great opportunity for you. There's something there.
Yeah.
There's some projection or some things getting triggered at a deep level in you that sounds like pretty deep and feels huge. Sometimes things feel huge and they're not, it's more the fear of going there. And when we go there, it's not as huge, but so we don't know until you actually can be with that. But good that you realize there's something here. But if you stay very close to your in the moment experience, what would be interesting is the moment of dissociation and what dissociation feels like in your body. So what is present, so that there's maybe you don't feel the underlying feeling, or it sounds like what's definitely more available to you is this dissociation that happens.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think it would be possible in that moment to get curious about dissociation from the perspective of this loving, accepting, observing presence?
Yeah.
Have you done that? Because I think that might be the missing step, because you go into dissociation and then something is saying like, oh, I probably should go to the feeling. I can't, I don't want to, there's a whole lot of stuff happening around that. Go there to all of that and what's underlying that dissociation.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
Yeah. So the general point here is because I think what happened is a little story got going in your mind, like, oh, the dissociation's in the way, and but that is your experience right in that moment.
That is it. Okay.
Yeah. So, and that's a tricky one to open to dissociation, because you're kind of opening to nothing, but you just like take time, make a big space. There might be very subtle sensations in the body that are present when this, as you're describing, dissociation happens. You just want to take some breaths and open wide and deep and give it some time and just see what's present, and don't push yourself to go into places that seem too hard to go. It's okay. That'll happen in its own time. But what is here, and it sounds like what you can go into and open to, is this experience of going away or dissociation. And that might be very fruitful for you.
Okay. So when I feel an emotion, I'm able to feel the sensation. And so I think what you're saying is, even if I'm not feeling an emotion, even if I'm just have a thought or something that even just feels like a thought, that still to bring it back to sensation in the body. Is that correct?
Yes, that would be that would be a good direction to go in. Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And like I said, it's tricky because we're talking about dissociation, but it makes me curious, also, like, what is that experience of dissociation? Like, what is that like in the body? Here's another question. What is happening in your experience that's making you use the word dissociation? Because that's a description of some direct experience. So what is that direct experience?
I think it's that I can't get in touch with the emotion.
Okay, so then you want to open to the I can't get in touch with. What is that like in your body?
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so whatever is coming up, you go with that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Can I add something to this?
Please.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a slightly different way of opening to this, which is that there's an immediacy of the experience, right? Where dissociation happens somehow so quickly that you can't catch the emotion, or you can't seem to get hold of it. But when you spoke of the emotion, you know, it's like, it seemed like you had a sense of the flavor of it.
Mhm.
Is that true?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's possible, you know, outside of that experience when this person is around, to bring the same curiosity to that flavor of that, you know, that flavor that you recognize, that you
Mhm.
call,
Mhm.
you know, like, yuck, can't stand that guy, you know, can't
Yeah.
stand, you know,
Yeah.
whatever, however it shows up, right?
It's
Um,
scary. I'd say it's scary.
Scary.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
not safe and just. Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, so just work with that too. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, just become equally curious
Yeah.
about what that feels like, you know, in a context which is not the immediate context,
Yeah.
but your mind is kind of, you know, aware enough of the flavor of that feeling. You know, like you could say, yeah, it's scary, right?
Yeah. Well, it's
So
interesting because I do find that there's more intuition here, and there's more of feeling other people's energy, and I think it's because it's me, and so I didn't have that stuff happen to me before, and it's happening more and more and more, where I'm seeing, you know, the beauty and the ugliness. Just it's just a mirror, and so learning how to work with these mirrors all the time. That's a particularly strong one, but there's been other ones too with just, you know, random people, and you just feel the energy. Maybe it is their personality, but still there's something in me that's obviously I'm a part of that.
mm,
Anyway, thank you.
mm. You know, it just makes me think, I don't know, Gail, maybe you'll have something to say about that. But, you know, as awareness opens, there's so much protection that falls away.
Mhm.
And, you know, there's an old conditioning that says that's not safe. And there's a new experience that can be one of that not really touching the core of who I know I am. So it's like playing around with that, you know, at the same time inquiring into that fear that arises in a very kind of elemental and animal way, right? And also realizing that you know, animal reaction, that elemental kind of existential reaction, it's just fear. But how truthful is that? You know, like how true is it that you have to be afraid? And and is the essence of you, is that touched by that person being that way or another way? You know, does that change anything?
I want to also speak to, you know, the sensitivity that you're experiencing. Everything, I think you made a beautiful point, Grace, about maybe there's some story around, oh, this is too fearful, and maybe that story needs to be seen through. And there's a reality to um, the experience of becoming more sensitive, which often happens to people. And it's a big change from what you might be used to, and can affect the nervous system. And so it calls for gentle, careful navigation, taking good care of ourselves in a practical way, you know, even to basic things like eating well and taking walks in nature and that kind of thing. Like if this sensitivity feels flooding to you, it's just an invitation to pay a little bit of attention to taking care of the human body.
Mm.
Yeah, and you know, it's also totally okay to not be around that person, you know, to sit a few chairs behind or to the side, you know. It's like there's no need. It's like part of the loving attention to self, that you realize that it's okay to protect yourself in new ways also, you know. So it's like your sensitivity is wide open, and so you may need to be clear about, you know, not wanting to be around certain people. That's totally okay, you know, or needing to sleep more, or, you know, eat better, or whatever it is, you know. It's like that new reality is calling for a new attention also. Yeah, like you say, Gail, you know, um, it's that being that you are, you know, it will need to find so many new ways of expressing and being there for yourself also.
Mm-hmm.
That may be very different from the old way of looking after yourself, you know, which probably also was dysfunctional in some ways, you know, as it is for all of us.
Or we go from not taking care of ourselves to realizing that this kind of kindness feels good, and it helps.
Yeah. Do you want to come back on that, Deanna?
No, I'm good. I'm good. Thank you so much.
Okay,
You're welcome.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that question.
Yeah.
You know, my sense is that whoever asks a question or contributes something, they're always doing it for a lot of other people also. You know, you're not just doing that for yourself. So let's see whether anybody else wants to come in there. I don't see anybody else right now. Gail, do you feel called to add anything to what's been said so far?
Yeah. What's coming to mind right now is to say a little more about emotions that people experience. Just following up on something you said, and I think, Deanna, you referred to it as well, that after an awakening experience, or even a deep, abiding awakening, conditioning runs. You know, we have conditioned patterns that run in us. We have experiences from the past. We've come up with some kind of belief system around things that have happened to us, especially when we're young. We have emotions in the body. And awakening is about the end of unconsciousness, you know, and before awakening, a lot of this is unconscious, some aspect, some parts of our experience is unconscious. But it's like everything is here to be felt and examined and investigated and just experienced. You know, it's not like we always need to be picking apart everything. It's just like, this is here now. Even the senses, like, the seeing, this hearing, you know, experiencing the sense perceptions that come through. So it's in just talking about like the new ways of being that feel so fresh. There's a certain, reality to that, I think. And so recognizing that the conditioning is experienced differently too. It might feel old, but there's a way that we can relate to it in a very new and fresh way, by recognizing when we're caught in some kind of pattern and looking at the emotion that's underlying that and driving that, and being so kind to ourselves to go into the, for the most part, as the physical sensations that come when we experience emotions. And it's quite uncommon and radical, I want to say, to include the body. Most of us are caught in our heads, stuck in our thoughts. The thoughts go over and over. We don't know how to stop them. And meanwhile, we're missing this whole realm of experience that's happening in the physical body. And so bringing our attention there, just to give the space for sensations to be, because traumas are held in the body, old experiences, unprocessed emotion, all of that ends up somehow contracting in the body. And in this opening, and I'm really speaking from my own experience now of like opening to all of that sensation, like, oh, there's a little subtle thing happening here, and like, oh, that one wants to come. And it's this beautiful process of liberation that that happens when the normal defenses have fallen away, or we allow ourselves to move through them. So really opening to that physical realm. And I advocate and love myself doing it with eyes closed, because we talk about the body, but when the eyes are closed, we don't even have the sense that there's a body. In fact, let's try it now if we can do that. If everybody, as much as you feel comfortable, just close your eyes and just take a breath or two, just to kind of orient yourself into the physical realm. And you might even track the sensations of the breath. And recognize that with your eyes closed, there's no way you can tell that there's a body here. All that's here is sensation. So as much as you can, and as much as feels right for you, just allow yourself to open. And when I say open, just create this big, spacious field, which of course you're not creating, you're just discovering what's already here. And just make this big, welcoming space for any physical sensation that wants to appear. There's no way to do this wrong. So there may be nothing, or there may be lots of things. There may be just energy running. There might be a little twinge here and there, or something quite pronounced. And when you notice a sensation, just like allow even more space for that. Let space kind of wend its way into that sensation so that you can really feel what it's made up of, the subtlety of it. And this isn't an exploration that we do with the mind. It's an exploration that we do in our direct experience. So you don't need the mind to do any of this. It's really very simple. It's in an allowing consciously of what's already here. And we bring a sense of curiosity or interest to this exploration. So there might be a tendency to notice, maybe some kind of tension or agitation, and, then the mind gets going like, oh no, there's a panic, or I need to do something about that, or this means that. And see if just for now, you can just notice it from this place of welcoming neutrality. Like, oh, okay, oh, there's that. It's like these experiences are knocking on the door and you become a friendly host for them. Just inviting them to be here. And then even more deeply, not taking anything for granted or assuming you know what it is. Like, oh, there's that tension I always feel in my jaw. Just let that go for now. And just go even more deeply into whatever sensation you feel. And recognize that your awareness is way vaster than the head or the brain or the physical body. In fact, it's endless. So we've been playing here with opening to physical sensation. And just to finish here in a couple moments, I want to suggest letting go of the intention to pay attention to physical sensation. Just let the attention rest in itself. So there might be a sense of coming back, or of opening. Or maybe this doesn't even make sense to you, and that's totally fine also. So opening fully to this presence that's fully aware in and of itself. And now get a sense of this awareness behind the area that we might call the eyes. Because in a moment I'm going to invite you to open your eyes, but before that, just feel that sense of endless space behind your eyes. And then when you open your eyes, there'll be a lot of input of objects. And right away, we're going to start processing them with our brains just automatically. But see if you can just stay with this stillness. Just to notice what's happening from this place of stillness. So when you feel ready, you can open your eyes. So I don't know your name, but I see you smiling. Grace, do you know who I'm the woman in the tank top?
Yes,
Jane, can we unmute Jane? I want to
Yes.
talk to Jane.
Yes.
Hi.
Go ahead, Jane.
Jane, do you want to say what you were experiencing?
Oh yeah, it's really, really cool because you might have noticed I was sitting back because I'm electrically sensitive, so it's hard talking about sensitivity, and that has sort of ruled my life for a while. And so that causes enormous isolation, and recently, and often homelessness or near homelessness or no security. So it's a real amygdala fear, and I was really going into it as you allowed that, and as it was brought up by Dana, actually. So it felt like explosions of energy at the base of my spine, and just by opening to all of that was behind the eyes closed, it's just, there was like just tremendous release. So it's even, because you can think that it's just fear, it's just a survival fear. I mean, I don't have any ideas about this. I just don't want to be cold and wet and hurt by Wi-Fi or whatever. Thousands of things, and ill, and whatever it is. And yet, through really allowing this explosion of like a nuclear energy inside, there's a joy through the most incredible homeless fear. And it keeps on like, what is this path?
Yeah.
What is this path to have to face constant survival, even? No emotions, it doesn't feel like, just fear, just gut fear. And I really appreciate the space to work with that. My whole body is just releasing.
Well, it shows on your face. I mean, the joy is just pouring out of you.
Enormous. And whether it's mine or anyone else's, it doesn't matter.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes I think I'm just here on this mountain, just releasing for all the fires and all the world grief and the homelessness we don't have on Earth. Not the Earth we remembered, but it's a new Earth or something. Well, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And you know, this is what we did here. Let's call it, we did something so simple. We didn't do anything.
Really, it's easier to do with other humans.
Yeah, yeah.
All alone, I do it, but not to the extent, not where I have a nuclear fusion necessarily. There is a group energy that is important in human beings to connect with.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And that is the joy that comes through the shadow. I mean, this is why each moment is an opportunity. There is no doubt, even the scariest things.
Mm-hmm.
And they keep coming.
And I love that that attitude about it. Like, and that's actually, you know, there's an intelligence there that it doesn't matter how many times you feel fear or whatever conditioned pattern comes. There's always that opportunity. Yeah. So people will go, oh, that didn't work. And what that means is, oh, it came back again. Well, so it came back again. It's okay. Yeah.
Right.
Another opportunity.
Constant renewal.
Constant
renewal.
Renewal. Yeah.
Or that, like you said, the sacred return.
Yes. Yes. That's exactly what that means. Yeah.
This is it. I went through the circle. Yeah. Oh, and so much more. How much energy is available here? It feels like it's at the base of the spine. It's just there. It's in the pelvis. It's ready to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yet it's locked sometimes, just locked with fear.
Mm-hmm. And so what you just saw is as you know, there was space for the fear. There wasn't the tamping it down or the avoiding it or whatever, you know, happens in your experience, that just for now, that wasn't what was happening. And so here it is. And it's not only okay, what you'd see is by the release of that, the joy becomes palpable. And the joy didn't arrive, it just got uncovered. Yeah.
and it is in the body.
Yeah.
It's undulating. It wants to undulate. It wants to live. That's the hard. That's the one part that takes some embodiment.
Yeah.
Ooh. All the no's.
Mm.
Releasing the nose and saying yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
You feel it in the jaw. No. Yeah, great. But again,
Well, enjoy yourself.
oh yeah, I
Yeah.
usually do. It's just more or less.
Mm-hmm.
And another wave comes along. And the next part is that silence.
Mm-hmm.
Relatively silent.
Hmm.
Do we have time? I want to ask, is there anyone else who wants to say anything about their experience during that meditation?
There's not much time, but we can maybe take one more question or person who wants to share if they want to. Doesn't look like that to me. I just want to, Jane, I just want to thank you for, just coming in here and sharing your explosion of energy and joy. And that's so, it's true that it's easier to do that when there's a supportive context. And it's so amazing to me. I know I keep saying this, but it's so amazing to me that this is possible online. That's why I'm offering these things online, so people can come without having to go places. They can come and be here with us and be supported. And there's something that's just wanting to be said here that I want to say, and it brings us right back to the beginning, which is about self-love and loving attention to self, to the body, to the, to the needs that are there. We started with the self-help movement and the kind of practicing loving oneself and all that. And it's just worth knowing, for those of you who aren't quite there yet, who are still looking, it's worth knowing that the more you get a sense of who you are, the more the self-love is just naturally there. You don't have to tell yourself you're okay. You're okay. You don't have to tell yourself, oh, I need to look after myself. I need to be kinder with myself. It's like it's naturally there. So, because it's a natural expression of that loving attention, that loving awareness that you discover. And that is such a deep, amazing discovery. It still amazes me that I don't need to do anything. It's all there. It just needs to be discovered again and again and again until it's discovered so deeply and known so fully that it just becomes who you are. It is already who you are, but somehow the conditioning veiled that, and so I don't know how you see that, Gail, but I'm just struck by how that that kindness to self just becomes so much part of one's life without doing anything. You know, it's just there.
And it's kind to turn toward our experience and allow it. When we reject what's happening, like we avoid a feeling, for example, that's the source of separation. So we fragment ourselves and then we try to fix it or make sense of it or function pretending that that feeling isn't there when it obviously is. And to turn toward our experience and meet it and join our awareness with it and allow it to be and explore it and make space for it, all of that, it's the kindest thing we can do, because it's the end of separation.
Well, that's a beautiful way to end. And thank you so much, Gail, for
My
being
pleasure.
with us. And thank you for everybody who showed up.
Thank you.
Contributed their experience and their questions and their presence. And thank you again, Gail.
Thank you.
I just, you know, I'm so grateful for the gift that you give to people. You know, if you're touched by Gail, I'd encourage you to subscribe to her blog. I'm amazed at how you can write something every week, Gail. I mean,
I send something out every Friday.
Yeah.
And I like to write, so that's actually all I'm writing right now, which is a little bit for me, but
yeah. So
I'm always inspired. So.
Yeah. So and if you'd like to explore videos of other online events that are part of the Living from Love series, you can come to the website, living-from-love.com. Or you can also go to the Grace Bubeck YouTube channel, which is where I post these videos. So thank you for joining us. And just to say, there's 2 more live book conversations coming up in August. One is next week on August 18th with Eli Jaxon-Bear, who happens to be one of Gail's teachers. And the one in 2 weeks' time on the 25th of August is with Michael Rodriguez. He's a relatively young new teacher. And so join me for that if you like. Wishing you so well. And thank you for being here.